Billionaire Alexander King froze in his marble foyer, his $10,000 briefcase crashing to the floor. After 4 years of silence, he heard something impossible echoing through his $50 million mansion, his daughter's laughter. Sophia hadn't laughed since the car accident, not since losing her legs, not since becoming the broken billionaire's daughter in the tabloids. Alexander's Armani shoes slipped on the polished marble as he raced toward the sound, his heart pounding with desperate hope. What he found in the living room defied every specialist's prognosis. His 10-year-old daughter, Sophia, who hadn't stood in 4 years, was balanced on the legs of a woman Alexander barely remembered hiring. A black woman in her late 30s with gentle hands and warm eyes, humming a soft melody while Sophia giggled with pure joy. "Sophia!" Alexander gasped, unable to believe his eyes. The woman, Grace, his new housekeeper, looked up with startled brown eyes. "Mr. King, you're early. Sophia and I were just—" But before Grace could finish, something miraculous happened that would shatter Alexander's carefully controlled world. Sophia looked at her father with fierce determination she hadn't shown since before the accident. "Daddy, watch what Grace taught me." With Grace's steady hand supporting her, Sophia placed one foot on the ground, then the other. Alexander watched in stunned silence as his daughter took her first trembling step in 4 years. The world stopped spinning. Every doctor had said this was impossible. Every specialist had declared Sophia's paralysis permanent. Yet here she was, walking toward him, with shaky but determined steps. But what Alexander didn't know was that this moment would expose devastating truths about his failures as a father and force him to confront whether money could buy the one thing his daughter truly needed to feel loved exactly as she was. 4 years earlier, the accident had happened on a rain-soaked highway. Alexander had been driving Sophia home from yet another business dinner where he dragged her along because his wife Isabella was already gone taken by cancer 2 years before that. The drunk driver hit them head-on. Alexander walked away with minor bruises. Sophia's spine was crushed. The doctors at Johns Hopkins delivered their verdict with clinical precision. Complete spinal cord injury. Your daughter will never walk again, Mr. King. Alexander King, who had built a tech empire worth $50 billion, who could buy anything he wanted, was powerless against this reality. First Isabella, now this. How much tragedy could one family endure? From that day forward, Alexander threw his enormous wealth at the problem. He hired the world's most expensive medical team. He flew Sophia to specialists in Switzerland, Germany, Japan. He spent millions on experimental treatments, robotic leg stem cell therapies. Nothing worked. Their penthouse became a sterile medical facility. Wheelchairs, therapy equipment, nurses in white uniforms bustling about with charts and schedules. Alexander worked 18-hour days, traveled constantly, and seemed to be running from the reality of his daughter's condition. Sophia, meanwhile, retreated into herself. The vibrant, spirited girl who used to dance around his office while he worked was replaced by a quiet child who spent her days staring out windows, barely speaking to anyone. Alexander hired an endless parade of the most qualified caregivers money could buy. Certified physical therapists, pediatric specialists, behavioral psychologists. All had impressive credentials. None could connect with Sophia or bring back any light to her eyes. That's when Grace Williams answered his job posting. Grace was 38 years old, originally from New Orleans, and had been working as a domestic helper and caregiver for over a decade. What Alexander's meticulous background check didn't reveal was the tragedy that had shaped Grace's entire approach to caring for children. 6 years earlier, Grace had been caring for a wealthy family's son, a 5-year-old named Marcus, who had been born with muscular dystrophy. Grace had spent 3 years loving that boy, celebrating his small victories, reading him stories, making him laugh even on his hardest days. When Marcus died from complications related to his condition, Grace blamed herself completely. She wondered if she could have done something more, something different. The grief nearly destroyed her. But Marcus's death had also taught Grace something profound. Every moment with a special child was precious, and sometimes the smallest connections could mean everything. When Grace walked into the King penthouse for her interview, she immediately sensed the cold sadness that filled the beautiful space. Alexander barely looked at her during their conversation, treating her more like a piece of equipment than the person who would be caring for his most precious treasure. "Miss Williams," Alexander said coldly, not even looking up from his phone, "I need someone who can follow medical protocols exactly. Sophia has a strict schedule of physical therapy medications and specialist appointments. There's no room for creative approaches or emotional involvement." Grace nodded respectfully. "Of course, Mr. King. But may I ask, what does Sophia like to do for fun?" Alexander finally looked at her with surprise and irritation. "Fun, Miss Williams, my daughter is paralyzed from the waist down. Her focus needs to be on medical treatment, not entertainment." Grace felt her heart break a little. This billionaire father was so focused on trying to fix his daughter that he'd forgotten she was still a child who needed joy and laughter and the feeling of being loved for who she was right now. "I understand medical needs are important," Grace said carefully, "but children also need to feel valued and happy, not just treated like medical cases." Alexander hired Grace partly because her references were excellent, and partly because the previous caregiver had quit after Sophia refused to cooperate with therapy sessions. But he made it clear that Grace was there to follow medical protocols, not to become emotionally involved. Grace's first week in the King household was heartbreaking. Sophia was polite, but distant, clearly used to caregivers who came and went without forming real connections. The 10-year-old spent most of her time in her wheelchair, either enduring therapy sessions she hated or sitting quietly by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, staring out at the city below. Grace followed Alexander's strict schedule, exactly medications, at precise times, therapy sessions, educational activities, meals. But she also began to notice things about Sophia that others seemed to miss. Sophia loved music, especially jazz and blues, that reminded Grace of her childhood in New Orleans. When Grace hummed softly while cleaning, Sophia would stop whatever she was doing and listen intently. Sophia was fascinated by art and had an incredible eye for color and design. She would spend hours sketching in a notebook, creating beautiful drawings that no one seemed to notice or praise. Most importantly, Sophia desperately missed physical affection and playful interaction. Grace noticed how the girl's face would light up when Grace accidentally touched her hand while helping, or when Grace made a silly comment while preparing meals. But Sophia had learned to guard her heart. Too many caregivers had come and gone, and she didn't want to get attached to someone who might leave her too. Grace understood this protective behavior because she felt the same way after losing Marcus. But she also knew that healing, both physical and emotional, required connection and trust. So Grace began making small changes to Sophia's routine additions that Alexander wouldn't notice, but that might help Sophia remember how to smile. She would hum New Orleans jazz while helping with exercises. She would tell stories about the colorful street art she'd seen growing up in the French Quarter. She would make gentle jokes during mealtimes to try to coax a giggle from Sophia. Slowly, very slowly, Sophia began to respond. The day everything changed started like any other. Alexander had left early for a board meeting that would determine a major merger, and Grace was working through Sophia's morning routine. But instead of the usual physical therapy exercises that Sophia dreaded, Grace had an idea. "Sophia," she said as they sat in the girls' bedroom overlooking Central Park, "want to try something different today?" Sophia looked at her with curiosity. In 1 week of working together, this was the first time Grace had suggested deviating from the strict schedule Alexander had created. "What do you mean?" Sophia asked quietly. Grace wheeled Sophia over to her bed and helped her transfer from the wheelchair to sitting on the edge. "In New Orleans, we have a saying, 'Let the good times roll.' It means that even when life gets hard, there's always room for a little joy." Sophia listened intently as Grace continued. "When I was little and felt sad or scared, my grandmother would remind me that my body was strong and capable even when it didn't feel that way." Grace sat on the floor in front of Sophia and gently placed the girl's feet on her thighs, supporting her legs. "Feel that your legs are still part of you. They're still connected to your heart and your spirit, even if they work differently now." Sophia looked down at her legs, resting on Grace's legs with wonder. For 4 years, her legs had felt like foreign objects, but with Grace's warm hands supporting them, they felt like they belonged to her again. "Can you feel my hands?" Grace asked gently. Sophia concentrated hard. "A little bit. It's like they're waking up." Grace smiled. "That's because they are waking up, not necessarily to walk. I don't know if that will happen, but they're waking up to being loved and cared for again." Then Grace did something no therapist had ever tried. She began to bounce Sophia's legs gently on her thighs, like a playful game rather than a medical exercise. "Let's play airplane," Grace said with a grin. "Put your arms out like wings." Sophia giggled the first genuine laugh Grace had heard from her and stretched her arms out to the sides. As Grace bounced her legs playfully while supporting her balance, Sophia began to lean forward and back side to side, using core muscles she hadn't engaged in years. "I'm flying." Sophia laughed, her face brighter than Grace had ever seen it. They played the airplane game for 20 minutes, with Sophia laughing and moving her upper body in ways that engaged muscles that had been dormant. When they finished, Sophia looked at Grace with shining eyes. "Grace, that was the most fun I've had since before my accident." Grace felt tears in her eyes. "Sophia, you are such a brave, incredible girl. Your accident doesn't change that." Do you think I might ever walk again?" Sophia asked quietly. Grace took her hands. "I don't know about walking, sweetheart, but I know you're stronger than you think. And I know your body wants to heal, even if it happens in ways we don't expect." That afternoon, while Alexander was in board meetings, Grace and Sophia continued their airplane game. But this time, Grace had Sophia place her feet flat on her thighs and encouraged her to push down while she supported the girl's upper body. "Feel that strength in your legs," Grace said. "Feel how they want to support you." Sophia concentrated intensely, and Grace could feel slight pressure from her feet. More sensation and control than Sophia had experienced in 4 years. "Grace?" Sophia whispered with amazement. "I can feel my legs pushing." "I can feel it too, Sophia. Your body remembers how to be strong." They practiced this pushing exercise several times throughout the afternoon, with Sophia growing more confident and excited with each attempt. When Alexander's car pulled up to their building that evening, he could hear something that stopped him cold as he stepped off the private elevator. The sound of laughter coming from his penthouse. Alexander had barely heard Sophia laugh in 4 years, and never with such pure joy. He quietly opened the door and followed the sound to the living room, where he found Sophia balanced on Grace's legs, playing their airplane game with complete abandon. For a moment, Alexander just watched in amazement as his daughter moved and laughed and played in ways he thought were lost forever. But then Sophia saw her father and wanted to show him something incredible. "Daddy, watch this," Sophia said with determination that reminded Alexander of the fearless little girl she used to be. Grace carefully helped Sophia position her feet on the ground while keeping her hands on the girl's waist for support. Sophia looked up at her father with fierce concentration and took one shaky step forward. Alexander felt like he was witnessing a miracle. His daughter, whom every specialist said would never walk again, had just taken a step, but as Sophia tried to take a second step, her legs gave out and she started to fall. Alexander lunged forward, but Grace was already there, catching Sophia safely in her arms. "It's okay, sweetheart," Grace said softly. "You did something amazing. One step is a victory." Sophia looked up at her father with tears of hope, not disappointment. "Daddy, did you see I walked? I actually walked." Alexander knelt down and pulled both Sophia and Grace into a hug, tears streaming down his face. "I saw a princess. I saw you walk." But as they sat there on the living room floor, Alexander realized the miracle wasn't just that Sophia had taken a step. The miracle was that Grace had given Sophia something no amount of money could buy: the belief that she was valuable and lovable exactly as she was. However, what Alexander was about to learn about Grace's past would make him question whether he deserved to have such an incredible person caring for his daughter. And the decision Grace was about to make would test whether their newfound hope could survive the weight of tragedy and guilt. 3 days after Sophia's miraculous first step, Alexander found Grace sitting alone in the penthouse garden at midnight, crying quietly while looking at a photograph on her phone. "Grace," Alexander said softly, not wanting to startle her. Are you all right? Grace quickly wiped her tears and tried to hide her phone. Mr. King, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you come out. I was just getting some air. But Alexander had already seen the photo, a picture of Grace holding a little boy with the brightest smile. Who is he? Alexander asked gently, sitting down on the garden bench beside Grace. Grace was quiet for a long moment, struggling with whether to share the truth. Finally, she looked at Alexander with eyes full of pain. His name was Marcus. He was 5 years old and had muscular dystrophy. I took care of him for 3 years, and I loved him like he was my own son. Alexander waited patiently as Grace gathered strength to continue. Marcus couldn't run or play like other kids, but he was the most joyful child I ever met. He would get excited about everything, stories, music, even just watching clouds through the window. Grace's voice broke. I thought I was helping him. I thought love and play and joy were enough. But I was wrong. What happened, Grace? Marcus died from complications, and it was my fault. Alexander felt his heart clench. How could it be your fault? Grace took a shaky breath. The night Marcus died, he was having trouble breathing. His parents were traveling, and the doctor said it was just a cold, but I knew something was wrong. I should have taken him to the hospital immediately, but I thought I could help him with home treatments. Grace was crying now, the guilt pouring out. By the time I realized how serious it was too late. Marcus died in my arms while we waited for the ambulance. If I had acted sooner, if I had trusted my instincts instead of trying to handle it myself, he might still be alive. Alexander felt tears in his own eyes as he watched Grace relive her worst nightmare. Grace, you couldn't have known. But I should have known, Grace said desperately. I was supposed to protect him. I was supposed to keep him safe, and I failed him completely. Grace stood up from the bench, pacing with agitation. That's why I can't let myself get too attached to Sophia. That's why I have to leave. Alexander felt like the ground was disappearing beneath him. Leave, Grace, you can't leave. Sophia has made more progress with you in 2 weeks than she made in 4 years with professional therapists. Don't you understand? Grace turned to face Alexander with anguish in her eyes. I'm not qualified to be caring for a child with Sophia's needs. I'm not a doctor or a therapist. I'm just a woman who plays games and tells stories. You're the person who gave my daughter hope again, Alexander said firmly. You're the person who made her laugh for the first time in 4 years. You're the person who helped her take her first step. Grace shook her head. One step doesn't mean I'm helping her. What if I'm giving her false hope? What if I'm preventing her from getting real medical help? What if something happens to Sophia because I thought love was enough? Alexander stood up and gently took Grace's hands. Grace, look at me. Marcus's death was not your fault. Sometimes children with serious medical conditions die despite everyone's best efforts. That doesn't mean you failed him. But I should have done more. You loved him. You gave him joy and laughter and made him feel valued for who he was. That's not failure, Grace. That's the most important thing you could have given him. Grace looked at Alexander through her tears. But what if I hurt Sophia? What if my approach is wrong and she gets hurt because I'm not following proper medical protocols? Alexander was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything he had observed over the past 2 weeks. Grace, can I tell you what I've learned about my daughter since you started caring for her? For 4 years, I focused entirely on trying to fix Sophia's legs. I hired the best doctors, bought the most expensive equipment, followed every medical protocol exactly. But Sophia got sadder and more withdrawn every day. Alexander looked toward the penthouse where his daughter was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. In 2 weeks with you, Sophia has smiled more than she did in the previous 4 years combined. She talks about her day with excitement. She looks forward to tomorrow. She believes in herself again. Alexander turned back to Grace. You haven't just helped her body, Grace. You've helped her spirit. And I think that's what she needed most. But Miss King, I'm not trained. The 23 medical professionals I hired were all highly trained. They had degrees and certifications and years of experience, but none of them saw Sophia as a whole person who needed joy and emotional connection, along with physical therapy. Grace was listening intently. Grace, you've shown me that healing isn't just about medical intervention. It's about helping a person remember who they are beyond their limitations. Sophia isn't just a girl who can't walk. She's a girl who loves art and music and silly games and feeling valued and loved. Alexander paused, gathering courage to admit something he had never said out loud. And you've shown me that I've been a terrible father. Grace looked at him with surprise. Mr. King, that's not true. It is true. For 4 years, I've been so focused on trying to cure Sophia that I forgot to just be her dad. I scheduled her life down to the minute, but I never asked what made her happy. I bought her medical equipment, but I never played games with her. Henry felt tears starting to form. Grace, you've been more of a parent to Sophia in 2 weeks than I've been in 4 years. You've given her something I never thought, to give her the message that she's perfect exactly as she is right now. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Mr. King, I want to help Sophia. I love her already, and I can see how much she's capable of, but I'm terrified of making the wrong decision. Grace, what if we work together? What if we combined your understanding of Sophia's emotional needs with proper medical support? What if we created an approach that honors both her medical requirements and her need for joy? Grace looked at Alexander with hope beginning to replace her fear. What do you mean? I mean, I want you to stay. Not as just an employee, but as Sophia's advocate, and the person who reminds all of us that she's a child who deserves to be happy. But what about medical protocols? We'll work with Sophia's doctors to create a plan that includes both professional therapy and your play-based approach. Alexander looked at Grace seriously. Grace, Sophia took her first step with you, not with a physical therapist or expensive equipment. With you. That tells me something important about what kind of healing she needs. Grace felt hope growing in her heart, but she was still scared. Mr. King, what if I fail again? Alexander was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised both of them. Grace, what if something wonderful happens because you stayed? What if Sophia learns to walk again because you believed in her when everyone else had given up? Alexander paused. Marcus died, and that's a tragedy. But his death doesn't erase all the joy and love you gave him while he was alive. And it doesn't mean you should stop giving that gift to other children who need it. Grace looked at the photo of Marcus on her phone, then back at Alexander. Marcus used to love when I would sing to him. Even when he was having difficult days, music would make him smile. Sophia loves when you sing too, Alexander said. I've seen her face light up when she hears you humming. Grace smiled through her tears. She has a beautiful spirit just like Marcus did. Yes, she does. And you see that spirit in a way that medical charts can't measure. Grace made a decision that would change all their lives. Mr. King, I'll stay, but I want to do this right. I want to work with Sophia's doctors to make sure we're supporting her health while nurturing her happiness. Alexander felt relief wash over him. Grace, I can't tell you what this means to me, to Sophia, but I have one condition, Grace said. I want you to be involved in Sophia's daily care, not just medical appointments, but the playing and laughing and connecting. Sophia needs her father to see her as a whole person. Alexander nodded. I want to learn. I want to be the father Sophia deserves. And Mr. King, I want you to call me Grace, not Miss Williams. If we're going to be partners in caring for Sophia, we should treat each other like family. Alexander smiled. Okay, Grace, and you should call me Alexander. 6 months later, the King penthouse had been transformed from a medical facility back into a home. While Sophia still had necessary medical equipment and therapy appointments, the space was now filled with music, laughter, and art. Sophia had progressed remarkably. She could stand independently, take multiple steps with assistance, and even dance to jazz music in her wheelchair. But more importantly, she was happy. Every morning, Grace would start the day with their airplane game, which had evolved into comprehensive play-based therapy that engaged Sophia's muscles while making her laugh. Alexander had learned to participate, discovering the joy of playing with his daughter. One sunny morning in Central Park, Sophia called out from her wheelchair. Daddy, watch this. Alexander looked up to see Sophia standing independently, holding a paintbrush. I'm going to walk over to that easel and paint you and Grace a picture. Alexander's heart raced as Sophia took her first step away from her wheelchair, then a second, then a third. She walked slowly but steadily across the grass to the easel, her face glowing with determination. When Sophia reached the easel and began painting, she turned to her father and Grace with the biggest smile Alexander had ever seen. "I walked all by myself. I painted. I'm not broken anymore." Alexander ran over and scooped Sophia up, spinning her around, while all three of them laughed and cried. As they sat together on the grass, watching people stroll through the park, they knew they had discovered something more valuable than any medical miracle. They had learned that the most powerful healing force isn't technology or money, it's love presence, and seeing each person as infinitely valuable just as they are. Sophia's journey from wheelchair to walking wasn't just physical transformation. It was proof that when people believe in each other completely, the impossible becomes possible. And sometimes the person who seems least qualified turns out to be exactly who can work miracles with their heart. Grace had given Sophia the gift of believing in herself. Alexander had learned to be truly present. And Sophia had given them both the gift of rediscovering hope, joy, and the transformative power of unconditional love.